Welcome to our Story University seminar, How to Get Insanely Rich, Chapter 5. I'm Chris Folk, CEO of Store Capital. I initially created a 10-lesson course series entitled Story University to help business leaders understand the essentials of business value creation. In this new seminar series, we'll help you understand how to materially impact your own personal wealth creation, or in other words, how to get insanely rich. After our first 4 chapters, you know the 4 common ways that people get rich, and you learned that business ownership and investing offers the best odds of getting insanely rich. Then we went through how to compute current investor rates of return from businesses using the V formula shortcut to that same computation. And the 3 business efficiency essentials to elevate returns that are at the hands of business leaders. That's a lot of ground to cover. You still with me, right? I mean, the good news is the series is archived and readily available to you to view again and again at your convenience. At the end of the 3rd chapter of the seminar, we examined our modeled 85% current rate of return by asking if such returns are indeed feasible, and they are. But here's one more thing. The 85% current rate of return does not equal your total pre-tax rate of return. To get there, you simply add your expected annual cash flow growth rate to the 85% current rate of return. That formula is called the Gordon Growth Model. It's simple, and I use it all the time. So if you have a 5% growth rate, then your total annual rate of return would be a cool 90%. And this can happen for 2 reasons. First, you can simply grow sales. But second, those added sales combined with economies of scale and operating leverage can cause your V formula components to change. Operating profit margins improve, your sales to investment ratio gets a lot better, maybe OPM starts to cost a little bit less. All of these will cause your current 85% rate of return to grow, and potentially a lot. And your mix of OPM and investor capital will change too. Think of this, as you repay your money that you borrow, you're actually swapping OPM for investor capital, which is causing your current equity rate of return to fall a tiny bit. Virtually all of the self-made folks in the Forbes 400 saw their current equity rates of return climb steeply from their earliest days in business. Having high rates of return together with businesses that became large got them on this exclusive listing. Sometimes I'm asked, which businesses are the best? I mean, after all, business models are not equal. The answer is that when doing side-by-side comparisons of companies, you take their V formulas and then set OPM to 0. See what the return would be like absent any OPM at all, which tends to accompany risk due to the fixed costs that it imposes. In our test case example, presuming that 100% of the company $1 million investment was funded with investor capital, then the current rate of return would fall from 85% to 28%. That's not a bad rate of return, but using 75% OPM at a cost of 9%, we were able to raise that number to the 85%. Okay, so now we're at a really important point. I'm going to illustrate to you what you've made in value. But first, I have to know what another investor might be willing to accept from your company. Or to put it another way, given a similar business model, similar growth rates, and similar investment risks, what would be an acceptable rate of return for an investor? In this case, I'll use an annual current pre-tax rate of return of 20%. Which is actually probably not far off the mark for many private equity investors. But you may be able to shop and do better. Anyway, if my company can generate an 85% current annual rate of return, but most investors will be happy with just 20%, I've effectively made my business worth 4.25 times more than it costs to create. 4.25 is actually your equity investment valuation multiplier. Just take the 85% current pre-tax rate of return and then divide it by the 20% investor requirement, and you get 4.25. My business equity is now worth $1,062,500. But since I put up original investor capital of $250,000, I've now made $812,500. Now that is huge, and you're on your way to being insanely rich. Now, to get a lot richer, you're going to need to grow the business. And if you're really lucky, you may not need to make any more investment. You may have complete operating leverage and economies of scale. Or on the other side of the scale, you may have very little operating leverage, which means that to double the size of your company, you're going to have to double your investment. Let's examine that. Your investment was $250,000. Your pre-tax cash flow is $212,500, which is an 85% current rate of return. But here's the thing. Either you or the company is going to have to pay taxes on this income. The company, if you form a taxable company, which is what most public companies are, or you, if the company is formed using an LLC or other common pass-through structure. In our model, we assumed a 25% effective tax rate, which lowers your free cash flow to $159,375 a year, or 63.8% after-tax return on equity. So, if you want to double the size of your company, you can roll or reinvest the $159,375, but you'll be short of the $250,000 you need to actually double the business. In fact, your current after-tax rate of return of 63.8% turns out to be also what is called your sustainable growth rate. That's the amount you can grow your company internally without needing any new investor capital, and presumes that all of the other V-formula variables are unchanged. Or to put it another way, you can come up with roughly 63.8% of the $250,000 you're going to need to double the business from the company. Now, I'm going to assume that the initial $250,000 was your own money, or YUM. So the question is whether you can come up with another $90,625, or the 36.2% shortfall that you have on the equity you need for the second location. Let's presume you don't have that money. Now, since you're doubling the size of your business, the 36.2% of the second location really equals about 18.1% of the business as a whole, which is the $90,625 is a percentage of the $500,000 in total initial equity investment in the two locations. Now, the question is, do you have to sell 18.1% of your company to raise this equity? Of course, the answer is no. Since you're making a current pre-tax rate of return that's 4.25 times what another investor is going to look for a similar investment, you only have to give away 4.26% of your company, which is the 18.1% divided by the 4.25 value multiplier we computed earlier. Now, let's assume that the second location's performance is identical to the first, produces a current pre-tax rate of return of 85% of investor capital cost. Your return would be higher than this because now you own 95.68% of the company, but you only put up 81.9% of the cost. So in other words, the 85% current rate of return on the cost of the investor capital is now split unevenly, since your minority shareholders are getting only a 20% current pre-tax rate of return on their stake. What does this make your current rate of return? Well, you take the 85% current pre-tax rate of return, you multiply that by your 95.68% ownership, and then you divide that into your 81.625% investment in the business at cost. The result, the current pre-tax rate of return on YUM climbs to almost 100%. Take that 98.85% current pre-tax rate of return and divide it by the outside investor 20% acceptable return target, and you get an investment that's worth about 5 times what you paid for it. Your value creation multiplier just rose from 4.25 times to 5 times by raising equity from another investor having a lower rate of return expectation. Given that you invested $250,000 of YUM in the first location and $159,375 of YUM in the second location, your business investment now becomes worth $2,046,375, meaning that you've created added wealth for yourself of $1,637,500. In other words, with just 2 locations and in a potentially short period of time, you've joined the approximate 4.5% of Americans over the age of 21 who are millionaires. And you've done this the way virtually all of the Forbes 400 members do it, by investing in and growing a business using your own or other people's money. Are you insanely wealthy yet? Insane wealth does not mean that you have to make it anywhere close to the Forbes 400. Insane wealth has different meanings for different people, but I might go with double the $2.5 million in wealth you might reasonably be expected to build up were you to put away $1,000 a month every month for 40 years at 7% interest. To add to that definition, I might suggest that you exclude the equity in your home or personal possessions. You know that this amount is insane because at the end of 2017, there were about 1.3 million Americans having net worths between $5 and $25 million. That's a lot of people, but still just a little bit more than half of 1% of the U.S. population over the age of 21. By now, you should have a clear understanding of the essential math behind how self-made Americans get insanely rich. The process starts with passion and ideas. The ideas become a 6-variable business model. The business model demonstrates the capacity to produce investor rates of return that exceed typical return requirements. Money to fund the ideas likely comes from a lot of OPM, other people's money. OPM starts with interest-bearing loans or leases from institutional capital providers like banks, equipment leasing companies, and real estate investment trusts like Store Capital. OPM can come from private sources such as loans from family members or loans from former business shareholders. Finally, your equity investment in a business can come from YAM, your own money, which comes from an initial investment that you make together with reinvested company cash flows. Or, as in our example, you can complement YAM at any time with even more OPM, only in this case it's equity OPM. Remember always that it is the business ideas, business models, and quality leadership teams that are the most precious and rarest of commodities. With them, and in our great country, opportunities for insane wealth creation are within your reach. I'm Chris Volk, thanking you once again for joining me on this value creation journey.